This morning we're going to look at the idea of the power of faith. But this lesson kind of was an outgrowth of going to the Ark Encounter. Just curious, if you've been to see the Ark at the Ark Encounter, raise your hand. A number of hands have gone up. And I've known of many other churches taking trips, as we had a trip here, and know of many people going individually to see the Ark. When the Ark was being prepared to be built, Tish heard of it. She said, I want to go. And it wasn't too many months after that, she said, I want to go to the Ark. And not so many months after that, she said, I want to go to the Ark. I said, Tish, Noah didn't build that one. Well, she wanted to go more than I did, but I can say this, I'm very glad that I got to go. Now, someone said, is it just like Noah's Ark? Well, you realize we have kind of that much telling us about the Ark itself. And so those who created the Ark Encounter, and they took what they called artistic liberties at times. For instance, they named Noah's wife and the boys' wives, in which the Bible does not name. And if you see the Ark itself, as you see there, you might think, pitch without and within. Is that really pitch on that wood? And of course, if we were to say gopher wood, well, no, we today don't know what gopher wood was. Someone said, yeah, it was, son, go for the wood. I don't think that's really what it meant. It's kind of the best that could be done. And yes, just like the Bible says, there are the three floors. And there, if you go to the Ark, you can go up 3 floors. You'll find rooms in it, like God said, put rooms in it. But standing there looking at it, you have a better sense of the size of it than possibly you've ever had before. And yes, it's big. The story of this begins in Genesis 6. The Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart, so that the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and the creeping things and the birds of heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Then we find that God tells Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. And this is where we find the limited details about the ark itself. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it a cubit above. And set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, if we're going to try to get an idea of the size of the ark, yes, you saw that picture, but yet it kind of is without a reference. Here is kind of a football field that gives you a bit of a reference for the size of the ark. The ark was 300 cubits long. Well, that's 450 feet. Now, if you were to take a football field and that red line to the left, that's not at the goal line, but that's kind of back of the end zone. And then it goes on beyond, it goes beyond the end of the end zone, out into the parking lot, you might say. And in essence, it's 1.5 football fields long. So you begin to get a concept or the idea of it's long. Now, if somebody says, well, what's a cubit? A cubit was from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, and usually considered 18 inches. Now, sometimes the exact inches can vary, maybe as much as 22, 24. Interestingly, those who built the Ark Encounter, they considered the cubit 20.5 inches. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they came up with that 20.5 inches. So their ark, if you would, was even longer than the 450 feet. But sticking at the 18 inches for a cubit, 450 feet long, 50 cubits wide. So that's wider than the football field, fair bit wider than the football field, though it doesn't really show it as well on this. And then 45 feet tall. That's big. Now, there's this idea when you're outside of the Ark Encounter of, wow, that's big. I hope that as you see this with a football field, you think, wow, that's big. And now you think in terms of it's Noah and his 3 sons. And, oh, by the way, this is not the modern times. You know, if we were to get these instructions, build this ark, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, and it's you and your 3 sons, even in this modern day, you might be thinking, how can I do that? Well, I want to see that Noah did not say some things. Things that we might say. He didn't say, for instance, that's too big. That might come to our minds. He didn't say, hello, Lowe's, Home Depot. You know, he didn't say, well, where will I get the materials and how will I get them to the job site? You know, these would be things that would be going through our mind, kind of convincing us, I can't do it. And if I convince myself I can't do it, you know what usually happens? I don't try to do it. You know, we might be saying Makita, DeWalt, Milwaukee, Bosch, Rigid, Ryobi. What are those? Power tools. You know, some you plug in, some are battery, but still power tools. I don't think Noah had those. And we still might be thinking, it's only me and my 3 sons. And we might even kind of be looking around about us and thinking, how can this ever get built with such a violent people around me? Now, as concerns Noah and his 3 sons, once again, we just have that much information about the building of the ark. Could he have contracted with those round about him to help? I don't know. It doesn't say yes or no. But you know, we might be, well, I've got school, I've got a job. Kind of like, I got other things to do. Or we may be like, there's a big game on Saturday. Or, you know, I'm just too busy. We see the enormity of the job and we might just want to sit down and not do it. And you know what? Noah also did not say, animals I'm allergic, or who will muck out the stalls, or feed, water. Remember, there's just 4 men to do this. Noah didn't say all this. But given instructions on even the enormity of such a task, you know how the story ends. He accomplishes it. Yes, it takes the years. God's given 120 years for this. Nevertheless, he builds the ark. Again, if God had told you, me, to do such a thing. Think of all that would go through our minds. And think of the few people who probably would even start or accomplish it. But Noah built the ark. You know, if we were to stand back and say, Noah, how did you do this? 450 feet wide, long. How did you do it? The Bible tells us how he did it. By faith. Noah, being warned of God concerning events as yet unseen. So in other words, that which will destroy the world has never been seen before. In reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. How did he do it? It was by faith. The reason I entitled this lesson, The Power of Faith. You take away faith, friends, you take away Noah building the ark. And you take away faith, you take away Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. The power of faith. And you know that it was only because he followed the instructions of God, built the ark, boarded the ark with those animals, that he was blessed in one day to see the dry ground again. And that rainbow, which is that promise God made to himself not to destroy the world again by water. The power of faith. That's how that ark got built. Another story. Story of Abraham. You know, we sometimes call him the father of the faithful, so certainly it's good that we acknowledge Abraham as we're talking about the power of faith. You find in chapter 22 this test. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, he said, here am I. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. Wait. Take Isaac and offer him as a burnt offering? The promise of Isaac was significant. And the promise that Isaac would be born and he would have descendants was oft repeated. You first find it in Genesis 12, where it makes mention of God would give him a blessed nation. That is, he would have to have Isaac and descendants to have a nation, a blessed earth. He said, in you all the nations of the earth would be blessed. This was the spiritual promise that ultimately it would come through Jesus Christ. And then a blessed land. Sometimes we say the promised land. So he was given the promise of a people. He was given the promise of a land and given a spiritual promise as well. As you go over to chapter 15, we find again he promised. He said, look toward heaven and number the stars. Oh, by the way, have any of you ever attempted to count the stars? I'm kind of sure of this. If you did, you lost count before you finished. And the more powerful the telescope, even the more stars you could count. So it's to the point that for us, we'd have to say innumerable. He says, so shall your offspring be. And so again, yet he has no children, but you're going to have innumerable offspring one day. You get to chapter 16, he says, surely I will multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And so again, you're going to have an offspring. They're going to be multiplied to the point you can't even count them. But the promises don't end there. Look at chapter 17, beginning of verse 6. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between you, me and you, and your offspring, after you throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. You see, almost every verse he makes mention of your offspring, and sometimes more than once in the same verse. So once again, promise after promise of not just Isaac, but many offspring. And then you get down to chapter 22, once again. Take your son and offer him as a burnt offering. All of these promises of nations coming from him. Multitudes of offspring. Offspring that are more than the stars of heaven. And yet he's telling me to kill the one who all that comes from. And once again, if it'd been man, like me, you, what'd be going through our minds? What would we be thinking? Well, some things that Abraham did not say that, frankly, we might tend to say. We might want to just make light of it. You're joking, aren't you? Or maybe we, in the back of our minds, I don't believe you. Not after you promised me Isaac, the son that would make my seed as the stars of heaven. It's kind of like either I'm believing that or I'm believing this. I'd rather believe that. Somebody would ask this. Would Ishmael do? I don't believe Abraham would ask that, but I think some of us might. And then there would be some that just say, no, God, I can't do that. Well, what did Abraham do? Get to chapter 22, verses 9 and 10. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there, laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now you know how the story ends. How that he was kept from killing Isaac. God kept him from killing Isaac. But in his own mind, in his heart, and physically he was ready to offer Isaac as that sacrifice on the altar. You know, and once again, if we were to say, how Abraham did you go up to that mountain? Did you build that altar? You placed your son, even bound him, and you were ready to take his life. How'd you do it? Because I think all of us realize, had we been asked that ourselves, would we have been able to do that? But if we say how, once again, we come back to this. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Then look at verse 19. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. You know, our minds are like, you promised me, now you say kill him, I don't get it. And Abraham's like, If He said there'll be these offspring, even though He says, kill Isaac, well, God's just going to bring him back. Because you see, God had said that offspring, those nations, will come from Isaac. Once again, the power of faith. I'll tell you another story. Gideon. And this is a fairly good picture about the story itself. In Judges 7:7 you read, and the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300, okay, the 300. How did he get to the 300? See, there was going to be a big battle. Big battle. Because Gideon, you see, had stood up for the Lord against idolatry. And those people who stood for the idolatry weren't so happy with Gideon and Gideon's people, the Jews. So there's going to be a big battle. He's got 22,000 men. 22,000! Sounds like a good number to me. But you know what God said? You tell everybody that's afraid to go home. Now He just has 10,000. But see, God wants him to know that this battle is not won by their strength. So He says, I want you to go, have them go down and drink water. And those who lap up like a dog, you keep them, send the others home. Now He just has 300. 300 out of 22,000. And He says, with the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give you the Midianites into your hand. And let all the others go, every man to his home. Let's see, 22,000 he starts with. 21,700 get to go home. Now he's just got 300. What about the opposing army? Verse 12, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the people of the east lay along the valley. Look at this, like locust in abundance. The camels were without number. As the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. You know what this is saying? Kind of figurative terms, but 300 men are facing an enormous army. You started out with 22,000. It may have been that 22,000 was facing an even more and greater number. Now it's just 300. Wait, 300 against a number so great it's as the sand on the seashore in abundance? Now somebody might say in modern warfare that can be done. That's not modern warfare. Okay? There's no hand grenades. There's no howitzers. There's no, and certainly no, weapons of mass destruction. 300 against such an army. But if we were to say, well, what happens? Well, somebody might remind and say, well, there were some signs. You know, there was a sign of the fleece where Gideon had said, you know, God, let me put out a fleece on the ground. And in the morning, he said, let all the dew be on the fleece and the ground be dry. Well, the fleece was so wet, he could just wring it out. Let's have another sign. The second sign, well, let the fleece be dry in the morning and let all the ground around it be wet with the dew. But no dew, no wetness on the fleece. Okay, it was just that way. He had these signs. But the reality is, how did it happen? From the scripture reading today, Gideon, through faith, conquered kingdoms. All of these, many more examples of faith, the power of faith from Hebrews chapter 11. Now I know somebody might say, wait a minute, Okay, it's great if I learn about Noah and the ark. It's great if I learn about Abraham and how he was willing to offer Isaac on the altar as a sacrifice. It's great to see about Gideon taking the 300 against the innumerable army. What about you and me? I'd suggest that it's much the same. In other words, will we be obedient in spite of difficulty? I would think it would be difficult to build that size of a boat with 4 men. In spite of my own reluctance, oh yes, we would be reluctant to offer our son on an altar. In spite of our own fears, we would probably be cowering, realizing we got 300 and there's an innumerable army. Will we be obedient in spite of the pressure of others to the contrary? Now let's look at some things in a specific way. Will I be baptized? God calls upon us. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. We even see that this baptism, Acts 2:38, is for the forgiveness of sins. Will I be baptized? Is my faith going to lead me to obey and be sure I've obeyed like the Lord said obey? Here it is, Acts 2:38. Another, will I refuse to conform to this world? Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world. In other words, faith led Noah to build ark. Will faith lead me to shun the world? Will I reduce my worship, Bible study to only 1 hour on Sunday morning? Or do I have that faith that says you put God first? And so I take advantage of other opportunities of Bible study and worship. Well, I love my enemies. What are some things that might be hard for you to do? Somebody's mistreated you. They mistreated the people you love. And they continue to mistreat you. And it's kind of hard for you to feel good about them. But yet we find in Matthew 5:43 where Jesus says, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Faith led Abraham to offer his son Isaac. Will faith lead us to love our enemies? I ask, will I give as I prosper? 1 Corinthians 16:2, we read we are to do that. But I would suggest to you once again, it's trusting, believing, having that faith in God that leads us to do this. Or else we'll think of everything else that ought to be done with our money. If somebody said, what is one of the greatest, what's one of the most I hesitate to even find the words. What's the most enormous task God's given man? That might be or begin to be on the par of building this huge boat without the modern conveniences and just 4 men doing it. Or what would be potentially as difficult as offering your son or taking 300 men against a multitude of an army. And I'll tell you, I think about the Great Commission where Jesus said, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. Just like Noah's thinking, ooh, that's one big boat. That's one big world. But Noah built that big boat one board at a time. And so with the whole world, we've got to start one person at a time. But I begin to wonder, has our faith been as strong as Noah and Abraham and Gideon? Or have we, with just these few things I've put before you, from being baptized now the Great Commission, have we failed miserably? And if we have, I'd really suggest it's because we've lacked the faith that Noah had and that Abraham had and that Gideon had. And I'd beg of you to examine faith in your life and then what that faith is to lead us to do. And if we can assist you in that obedience this morning, whether it's to begin that obedience in baptism or if along the way you've strayed, if we could assist you, please come.